everyone. This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardines, to use this as an educational material. This is, by the way, the group 2, and we are going to report the ideology of globalization together with the 6 core claims by Manfred B. Steger. In recent article in Ideological Boundaries, Michael Frieden argues convincingly that the current fragmentation of established ideologies and the revived uncertainty concerning whether ideology still exists have highlighted the difficulty of capturing the changing morphologies of political belief systems. In order to address this problem, the British politics theorist proposes two fertile lines of inquiry. First, to question the implicit holism in the notion of ideological family, and second, to query the dominant conventions of classifying and categorizing ideologies, with a view to establishing the degree to which they constitute useful clusters. Examining the first line of inquiry more closely, Frieden briefly discusses globalism as a possible holistic contender. Frieden's article possesses a number of virtues. First, it wisely reminds students of ideology that political belief systems are ephemeral constellations whose shifting morphologies demand periodic scholarly reassessments. Second, it challenges 21st century's analysts of ideology to reappraise antiquated, popular, and conventional classification systems that might obscure more than they illuminate. This means that scholars must be willing to entertain the possibility of wholesale ideological transformation and thus be prepared to rethink, revise, and perhaps replace outdated conceptual morphologies that no longer capture the dynamics of actually existing political belief systems. Third, it displays considerable intellectual imagination by calling for experimental thought exercises designed to redraw old ideological boundaries and reclassify ideological systems. While sharing Frederin's interest in changing ideological systems as well as sympathizing with his two proposed methodological lines of inquiry, Steger, nonetheless, must resist his brief assessment of globalism. Contra Frieden, this article maintains that it is not too early to pronounce on globalism's status as an ideology. In fact, it will seek to establish that globalism not only represents a set of political ideas and beliefs coherent enough to warrant the status of a new ideology, but also constitutes the dominant belief system of our time against which all of its challengers must define themselves. Steger opened his arguments by drawing careful analytic distinctions between often conflated terms involving the concept of globalization. Following Frieden's first line of inquiry, the main section of this article examines globalism's morphology with special considerations given to its ideological status. However, Steger proposes to disaggregate globalism not merely into core, adjacent, and peripheral concepts, but perhaps more dynamically into a set of 6 core claims that play crucial semantic and political roles. With regards to semantics, Steger argues that these claims absorb and rearrange bits and pieces of several established ideologies and integrate them with new concepts into a hybrid meaning structure of genuinely novelty. Their political role consists chiefly in preserving and enhancing asymmetrical power structures that benefit particularly social groups, merely touching upon Frieden's second line of inquiry. Steger's end with a short experimental thought exercise designed to bring the insights gained from Steger's critical analysis of globalism to bear on the necessary project of reclassifying conventional political belief systems.
Globalization process, condition, or ideology. As Michael Fraden points out in his editorial, the term globalization denotes not an ideology but a range of processes nesting under one rather unwieldy epithet. Ideologies of globalization, in part its conceptual unwieldiness, arises from the fact that global flows occur in different physical and mental dimensions, usually divided by Arjun Avadurai into ethnoscape, technoscape, mediascape, financescape, and audioscape. Moreover, as I noted elsewhere, since its earliest appearance in 1960, globalization has been used in both popular and academic literature to describe a wide variety of phenomena, including a process and condition, a system, a force, and an age. Given the different meaning of this concept, their indiscriminate usage invites confusion. A sloppy completion of process and condition, for instance, encourages circular definition that possess little explanatory power. In my views, the term globalization should be confined to a set of complex, sometimes contradictory social processes that are changing our current social condition. Based on the modern system of independent nation state, indeed most scholars of globalization have defined their key concept along those lines as a multi-dimensional set of social processes that create, multiply, strengthen, and intensify worldwide social interdependencies and exchange, while at the same time fostering in people growing awareness of deepening connection between the local and the distant. At its core, then globalization is about the unprecedented compression of time and space as a result of political, economic, and cultural change, as well as powerful technology innovations. The slogan globalization is happening implies that we are moving from the modern socio-political order of nation state that gradually emerged in the 17th century toward the postmodern condition of globality. Indeed, like modernization and other verbal nouns that end in the suffixation, the term globalization suggests a dynamic base captured by the nation of development or unfolding along discernible pattern. Such unfolding may occur quickly or slowly, but it always corresponds to the idea of change, and therefore denotes the alternation of present condition. This crucial focus on change explains why globalization scholars pay particular attention to shifting temporal moods and the reconfiguration of social and geographical space.
So when does a rising political belief system warrant the holistic designation ideological family? And what criteria should be used and what characteristic must be pertained to upgrade a conceptual module or segment contained in a broader host ideology and limited in its ambition and scope to the status of ideology? So, political and social theorists frequently cite blurred ideological boundaries, additional dependencies, historical continuities, unavoidable conceptual overlap between two or more ideology, and methodological differences in the study of ideologies as the main reasons for the considerable difficulties involved in determining the precise stage of emerging political belief system. However, researchers have scarcely hesitated to put forward a host of criteria and characteristics for separating ten additional cluster from thick ideology. Terry Eagleton insists that full-blown thought system typically contain six meanings. Also, Michael Freden suggests that mature ideologists display unique futures anchored in distinct conceptual morphologies, resembling well-furnished rooms containing various pieces of furniture uniquely arranged in proximity to each other conceptual units patterns and ideology and thus permits its categorization. In addition, their morphology must be broad enough to encompass the spread of conceptual decontestation characteristic of mature ideological families. Thus, Freden provides researchers with three useful criteria for determining the status of a particular political belief system. First, its degree of uniqueness and morphological sophistication. Second, its context-bound responsiveness to a broad range of political issues. And third, its ability to produce effective conceptual decontestation chains. With regard to the third criterion, it is important to note that Freden considers decontestation a crucial process in the formation of thought systems because it specifies the meaning of core concepts by arranging them in a pattern or configurations that links them with other concepts in a meaningful way.
Globalization is about the liberalization and global integration of markets. Examining the utterances, pitches, and writing of influential advocates of globalism. My previous work on globalism suggests that globalization and market constitute its twin core concept, market of course, and also play as important role in two established ideologies. The libertarian variant of liberalism, often offered to us neoliberalism, inspired by the ideas of Herbert Spencer, Friedrich Hayek, and Milton Friedman, and the late 20th century brand of Anglo-American conservatism and neoconservatism, associated with the views of Kent Joseph, Margaret Thatcher, and Ronald Reagan. While globalism borrows heavily from both ideologies, it will be a mistake to reduce it to either. Moreover, neoliberalism and neoconservatism should not be seen in ideological opposite, for their similarities sometimes outweigh their differences. In general, neoconservatives agree with neoliberals on the importance of free markets and free trade, but they are much more inclined than the latter to combine their hands-off attitude towards big business with intrusive government action for the regulations of the ordinary citizenry in the name of public security and traditional values. In foreign affairs, neoconservatives advocate a more assertive and expansive use of both economic and military power, although they often embrace the liberal ideal of promoting freedom and democracy around the world. What gives globalism to its uniqueness and morphological sophistication then is not merely its ability to observe and rearrange ideas from conventional ideologies. Three additional factors must be taken into consideration: the centrality concept, globalization. No other ideology is centered on the notion of shrinking. Time and space, the conceptual shape of market from its adjacent or peripheral location is in liberalism and conservatism to globalism conceptual core, and the formation of six highly original ideological claims, the conscientization chains.
I am Christian Gumera and this is Claim 2. Globalization is inevitable and irreversible. The second mode of decontesting globalization turns on the adjacent concept historical inevitability. In the last decade, the public discourse on globalization describing its projected path was saturated with adjectives like irresistible, inevitable, inexorable, and irreversible. For example, in a major speech on U.S. foreign policy, President Bill Clinton told his audience, "Today we must embrace the inexorable logic of globalization. Globalization is irreversible. Protectionism will only make the things worse." Frederick Smith, chairman and CEO of FedEx Corporation, proclaimed that globalization is inevitable and inexorable, and it's accelerating. Globalization is happening. It's going to happen. It does not matter whether you like it or not. It's happening. It's going to happen. Social elites in the global south often faithfully echoed the determinist language of globalism. For example, Manuel Villar, the Philippines Speaker of House of Representatives, insisted that we cannot simply wish away the process of globalization. It is the reality of a modern world. The process is irreversible. At first glance, the attempt of the contest globalization in such determinist terms seems to have a poor strategy. polarizing thought system that borrows heavily from neoliberalism and neoconservatism. After all, throughout the 20th century, both liberals and conservatives criticized Marxist socialism and its the evaluation of human agency and its contempt for individualism. In particular, leading neoliberals like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman attacked the Marxist notion of history as a teleological process in accordance with inexorable law. And yet, the sociologist Ulrich Beck points out, in a way neoliberal globalism thus resembles its archenemy, Marxism. It is the rebirth of Marxism and management ideology. How does one explain globalism's import of a adjacent concept that causes serious ideological and contradiction? Let me suggest three possible reasons. First, the Michael Frieden points out philosophical inconsistencies and semantic tensions are the result of unavoidable logical and cultural constraints, and therefore are bound to creep into any political belief system. Unable to bypass these contradictions, all ideologies, especially fledgling ones, must develop effective mechanisms to cope with them. Second, the tension between determinism and conservative ideology may be less severe than it appears at first sight. After all, the belief in extra-human natural origins of social order and the related idea of organic change independent of human will constitute two core concepts of conservatism. Third, there is a political reason why globalism puts a fundamental liberal idea in close proximity to its core concepts. Regardless of how early 20th century leaders of German social democracy really felt about the alleged inevitability of socialism, every single one of them acknowledged the tremendous political potency of this idea. That's all. Thank you.
Claim 3. Nobody is in charge of globalization. So the third mode of decontesting globalization hinges on the classical liberal concept of self-regulating market. The semantic link between globalization's market and the adjacent idea of leaderlessness is simple. If the undisturbed workings of the market indeed preordained a certain course of history, then globalization does not reflect the arbitrary agenda of a particular social class or group. In other words, globalists are not in charge in the sense of imposing their own political agenda on people. Rather, they merely carry out the unalterable imperatives of transcendental force much larger than narrow partisan interests. For example, Robert Hormats, the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs International, he emphasized that the great beauty of globalization is that no one is in control. That the great beauty of globalization is that it is not controlled by any individual, any government, or any institution. Likewise, Thomas Friedman alleged that the most basic truth about globalization is that no one is in charge, or we all want to believe that someone is in charge and responsible. But the global marketplace today is an electronic herd of often anonymous stock, bond and currency traders, and multinational investors, connected by screens and networks. However, the replacement of Claim 3 with a more aggressive pronouncement of the global Anglo-American leadership should not be read as globalism's ideological weakness. Rather, it reflected its ideational flexibility and growing ability to respond to a new set of political issues. Indeed, like a full-fledged political belief systems, globalism was increasingly bearing the marks of an ideational family broad enough to contain the more economistic variant of the 1990s as as its militaristic post.
Claim 4. Globalization benefits everyone in the long run. This decontestation chain lies at the heart of globalism because it provides an affirmative answer to the crucial normative question of whether globalization represents a good phenomenon. The adjacent idea of benefits for everyone is usually unpacked in materials such as economic growth and prosperity. However, when linked to a globalism peripheral concept, progress, the idea of benefits for everyone taps not only into liberalism, progressive worldwide view, but also draws on the powerful socialist visions of establishing an economic paradise on earth, albeit in the capitalist from worldwide consumerist utopia. Thus, Claim 4 represents another bold example of combining elements for seemingly incompatible ideologies under the master concept of globalization. At the 1996 G7 summit, the heads of state and government of the world's seven most powerful industrialized nations issued a joint communique that exemplifies the principal meaning of globalization conveyed in Charge 4. Economic growth and progress in today's interdependent world is bound up with the process of globalization. Globalization provides a great opportunities for the future, not only for our countries but also for all others too. Its many positive aspects include an unprecedented expansion of investment and trade, the opening up to the international trade of world's most populous regions and opportunities for more developing countries to improve their standards of living. The increasingly rapid dissemination of information, technological innovation, and the proliferation of skilled jobs. These characteristics of globalization have led to a considerable expansion of wealth and prosperity in the world. Hence, we are convinced that the process of globalization is a source of hope for the future. In addition, globalists often seek to cement the contestation of globalization as benefits for everyone by co-opting the powerful language of science which claims to separate fact from fiction in a neutral fashion that is solely on the basis of hard evidence. And yet, the two most comprehensive empirical assessments of changes in global income distributions in the last decade have 49 arrived sharply conflicting results. Even those globalists who have considered the possibility of unequal global distribution patterns nonetheless insist that the market itself will eventually correct these irregularities. As John Macon, chairman of the U.S. Public Securities Association, puts it, episodic dislocations such as mass unemployment and reduced social services might be necessary in the short run, but in the long run, they will give away to a quantum leaps in productivity. 50. Productivity. The Al Qaeda attacks of September 11 only seem to have added the fervor with which globalists speaks the supposed benefits occurring from the liberalizations and global interrogation of markets, defending his view that the benefits of globalization must be defended at all costs. President Bush asserted that free trade, free markets have proven their ability to lift whole societies out of poverty. So the United States will work with individual nations, entire regions, and the entire global trading community to build a world that trades in a freedom and that therefore grows in prosperity.
Claim 5 became firmly linked to the Bush administration neo-conservative security agenda. The president did not mince words in securing freedom triumphs his New York Times op-ed piece a year after the attacks. As we preserve the peace, America also has the opportunity to extend the benefits of the freedom and progress to nations that lack them. We seek a peace where repression, resentment, and poverty are replaced with a hope of democracy, development, and free market and free trade. 14 months later, he reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to the global expansion of democracy as the third pillar of the United States peace and security vision of the world. This idea is securing the global economic integration through an American-led military drive for democratization around the global became especially prominent in the corporate scramble for Iraq following the official end of major combat operation on May 1, 2003. Already during the first days of the Iraq War in late March 2003, globalists had suggested that Iraq be subjected to a radical economic treatment. For example, Robert McFarlane, former National Security Advisor to President Reagan and current chairman of the Washington, DC-based Corporation Energy and Communication Solution, LLC, together with Michael Blazer, CEO and President of the Sigma Blazer, an international equity fund management company, co-authored a prominent op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal bearing the suggestive title, Talking Iraq Private, calling on major U.S. corporations jointly with other multinationals to lead the effort to create capital-friendly environment in developing countries. The globalist duo praised the military operation in Iraq as an indispensable tool in establishing the political, economic, and social stability necessary for building the basic institution that makes democracy possible. In their conclusion, the two men reminded their readers that U.S. must demonstrate that it is not only the most powerful military power on the planet, but also the foremost market economy in the world, capable of leading a greater number of developing nations to a more prosperous and stable future. In what amounted to another clear demonstration of their political resonance, these globalist ideas translated almost immediately into collective decision. For example, Ambassador Paul Bremer, the U.S. head of Coalition Provisional Authority, pressured the governing council to let Order 39 take effect, permitting complete foreign ownership of Iraq companies and assets apart from natural resources.
Claim 6. Globalization requires a global war on terror. Like the previous claims, this final decontestation change attests to globalism's political responsiveness and conceptual flexibility. It combines the idea of economic globalization with openly militaristic and nationalistic ideas associated with the American-led global war on terror. At the same time, however, Claim 6 possesses a somewhat paradoxical character. If global terror were no longer a major issue, it would disappear without causing globalism to collapse. In that case, it seems that Claim 6 is a contingent one and thus less important than the previous 5. On the other hand, if the global war on terror turns out to be lengthy and intense engagement as suggested by the current American political leadership, then conclusion, reclassifying ideologies, relying on Michael Frieden's 3 criteria for assessing the maturity of political belief systems, I have come to this conclusion by subjecting its 6 core claims to a critical morphological analysis which attests to globalism, conceptual sophistication, and its ability to respond to a broad range of political issues. Taking advantage of the rapid descent of conventional ideologies, largely caused by such cataclysmic events as the Information Revolution, the collapse of Soviet-style communism, the 9/11 attack, and the ensuing US-led global war on terror, globalism managed to achieve discourse dominance in less than 2 decades. To be sure, my assessment of globalism's ideological status requires further scholarly collaboration. First, as Freden points out, whether an ideational cluster should be categorized as an ideological pretender or a new ideological family is ultimately an empirical question that must be resolved by the manner in which its discourse is institutionalized and broadly adopted, and the degree to which it can provide satisfying answers to basic political questions. In particular, I believe that the study of globalism would benefit from creative interdisciplinary research designs and methodologies that combine both qualitative and quantitative approaches. Second, the evaluation of globalism stature raises broader methodological political issues linked to the analysis of any ideology. Assessment of ideologies always take place in a specific ideological context, meaning that the activity of the researcher does not occur in a political vacuum. Thus, I would argue, contra Freden, that morphological analysis can hardly be separated from recommending political action. Having acknowledged these important caveats or warnings, I end this article with a brief thought exercise. If globalism indeed constitutes a new ideological configuration that dominates today's ideational landscape, then what does this mean with regards to the crucial task of reclassifying political belief systems? Most importantly, I believe it would mean that student ideology would no longer rely on the outdated categories of the last 2 centuries to make sense of current ideological dynamics. What would happen if we were to reclassify ideologies on the basis of contemporary relevance? It seems to me that we would have to introduce new classification schemes that divides the ideological concepts landscapes into 3 regions. At the center, we would find the ideological family of globalism with its 2 main variants, namely pre-9/11 market globalism and 9/11 imperial globalism. Challenger of the globalism on the right might include national populism, neolocalism, and various religious fundamentalisms with strong political inclinations. Oppositional ideologies on the left might include global feminism, international populism, and various ideational clusters associated with global social justice movements, making them the main player of the contemporary ideological stage. And the tumultuous opening years of the new century have been a powerful reminder of the ancient Greek adage attributed to Heraclitus that everything flows and nothing stays fixed.